Hello, it's RBB. Today we're going to talk about very basic bump mapping. And what bump mapping allows us to do is to take simple geometry and fake the camera and the light into thinking that it's more complex than it is without having to model it. Okay, so let's talk real quick about what a bump map is doing, and then we'll look at bump maps. Okay, so if you look at any cube, right? Any shape, any piece of geometry. Every one of the faces has what's called a normal. And right in the center of it is this little antenna guy sticking out. And that antenna is reporting back to the camera and to the renderer, hey, there's a light above me over here, and I see there's a camera over there, and there's objects near me, and I am shiny, and it relays all the information about the face that normal is sticking out of. So in a cube, there are 6 of them. So in order to render this, right, if we were to render this, it's going to ask all of those faces at least one time, hey, what do you look like? How are you lit? What color are you? That kind of thing. If we have a more complex object like a sphere, okay, so even when a sphere is born, instead of having 6 faces, it's got like 400 faces, right? Or whatever, a whole bunch. It's got a whole bunch, and every single one of these faces is reporting to the renderer, hey, there's a light near me, there's another object near me, I am blue and shiny, here's the camera, I'm being shadowed by this, right? And so it's reporting back. So the more complex the geometry is, the more normals there are, and the longer it takes to render, because every one of these guys is going to report back in at least once. That's getting into samples, which we're not going to do. Okay, so what I did was I went ahead and I made a quick little scene here. Um, and I know that this is my scene camera and it's not locked because I am going to wind up moving it around in a little bit to show you some stuff. Okay, so here's my scene camera. And I went ahead and I just made this wall. All right, and I in my Hypershade, which you look at the last video, we made different materials, right? And I made this one called Metal Blue. You can see I changed the roughness and the metalness just a tiny bit, and I changed the roughness in the specular just a tiny bit to sort of make this, I don't know, hospital-y green looking um, metal. And then I also made a material for the floor. Okay, and to apply those, I selected them, right-clicked here and said assign material to selection. Okay, we did this in the last video. You want to go back and see the Hypershade, knock yourself out. Okay. And then here's the little floor texture, nothing special. I also created 2 big area lights so that this is lit like this. This is what it looks like when we render it, okay? Not a big deal. Um, and let's say that this is in our scene that we're building, that we're being asked to build for a game or live action. Somebody's going to run past this panel, in a spaceship, and they don't want to build it in real life. They don't want to have to, fake a spaceship wall. So we're making it in 3D, and we don't want to spend a million years on it either. So the director said, hey, this wall's got all kinds of like rivets and panels and vents and buttons and cables and hinges and all those types of things. Well, we got mad skills. We could go ahead and model all of those. We could model panels and rivets and hinges and vents and all that kind of stuff. But the person's going to run past this in like a second, and they're not going to stop and touch the wall at all. So do we really need to model all that? No. And this is where a bump map comes in. Let me show you what, not sure whether to show you, like, I'll show you a picture of a bump map. Okay. This is a bump map, and this is from Grab somebody. What's this called? Um, grabcad.com. They had this nice picture. Okay. So when we have a picture of like this wicker basket material, Maya takes this image, which we haven't talked about how to do yet, and wraps it around our geometry. It wraps it around our sphere. And every one of those little faces says, hey, I've got this brown texture on me. I've got this beige texture on me. I've got this white texture on me, right? And it reports back, and that's what it looks like. But it doesn't look very real. But man, wouldn't that take a million years if we wanted to model like a wicker ball, like a woven ball? We'd have to have all of these, like every one of these little bumps, and it goes under the one next to it and over and under. Oh my gosh, that would take 100 million years. So we can fake it with a bump map. We can also fake it with a normal map, but that's for a different video. So what the bump map does is it takes the image and it kind of ignores the color of the image, and it uses a alpha channel, which if you recall is black to white, 0 to 1, right? 0 to 100% of something. So for example, think of a checkerboard, a black and white checkerboard. If you took that alpha channel, that black and white checkerboard, and you applied it to certain attributes in 3D rendering, it'll change over the surface area for each one of those black and white squares. So if we put a checkered ball on top of this as an alpha channel, wherever the black square was, whatever we plugged it into, say transparency, right? It would make that area transparent, and the white one would be opaque, and then transparent, and then opaque, and transparent, and opaque, rather than going in and having to delete every other face. Okay, we can fake it with these alpha channels. Now, we have what's called a bump map, and the bump map is going to trick the normal into thinking it's closer to the light or further from the light. So if it's 50% gray, it doesn't change at all. If in the alpha channel it is lighter than 50% gray, it will appear to bump toward the light. If it is darker, heading toward black, it will bump in and cause a shadow. Okay, so this has a bump map that looks like wicker. And any of these places that look like they're bumped out are lighter than 50%, and any of these places that look like they're bumped in are darker than 50%. Don't worry about displacement right now. That's for a later time. This is actually going to move the geometry. It's actually going to push and pull the actual faces, which means we need way more geometry. So we're not going to talk about that. The bump map, you'll notice, does not actually push or pull anything. It just fakes it. Displacement, it does. Okay, this just fakes it. All right, so let's get rid of that guy. Thank you to GrabCAD for that image there. Okay, so I just made this little guy right here, and I'm going to make this, say, a panel full of spaceship bits that I don't have time to model because they're not paying me enough. Let's look at how you can make a bump map. If we went into, say, Photoshop or any kind of graphics thing, if we have a 50% gray background and Maya works on squares for its materials, its images, the UV mapping, which we'll talk about another time, the wrapping paper comes in squares. Okay, so I made a 2550 by 2550 square, and it's 50% gray. And then I just took a black brush and a white brush, and I made 3 dots. In black, I had 0% hardness, 100% hardness, and then 50%. Same thing with white. Okay, I did 0% hardness, 100% hardness, 50% hardness. Okay, and then I just save this as a JPEG because it doesn't matter. It's all just black and white. We don't actually need any transparency. So I saved it as a JPEG. Now, what's incredibly important that you got to remember is that in Maya, remember how we've been setting our project all along and you're not really sure why? I'll show you why, because now it's going to matter. If we go up to File, we'll make sure we set our project, which I've done 100 times. You'll see that in this project, in my Maya projects, okay, in YouTube practice, which is the one we're in right now, right? Inside that are all those folders that Maya made for us at the very beginning when we said create a new project. And we weren't sure why we would ever need these. Any image, any source image that Maya is going to call up to use in our render needs to be in the correct folder. And so because we are sourcing this bump map, that image, it needs to go in the source images folder. So this is where you would place your, you would save your images here. Okay. And you would save them here, and you'll see why, because we're going to pull them up in a second. So when I save that in Photoshop, I would then go open up my documents, my Maya, my projects, blah, 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 and put it into the source images. Okay, so let's look at we're not going to look at UV unwrapping because that's a whole nother video, but let's go ahead and pop all the way over to the right for this piece that's called Machine. And I'm going to go down to Metal Blue, which is the material we made. Okay, and we're used to this, right? This is nothing new. It's a color. There's the diffuse and the roughness and specular that we made in the Hypershade. I can adjust it here. But if I scroll down a little bit to geometry, and that's usually closed, if I come down here to geometry, I'll see an option called bump mapping. Now, when you see these little checkerboards over here in Maya, that means that you can plug in another render node. And if you're thinking, what the heck's a render node? Remember when we talked about the hypershade and we didn't want to talk about render nodes? These guys right here. Okay, these are the render nodes. These are the nodes that plug into what it's going to look like, right? So if we have transparency, or we have a bump map, or we have a displacement map, or we have a normal map, or we have out color, we have whatever, we can plug those things in like an old-fashioned operator, right? And then this is what the outcome will look like. So that's what it's doing. So it's creating another one of those. We don't care. We're not even going to look at it, right? So I want to come over here to bump mapping. I want to click on the little checkerboard, and it's going to bring up this create render node, just so you know what it's doing. If you looked at the node map, you would see it, right? And what we want to do is we want to call up a file. We're going to call up that file that we just made in Photoshop. So I'm going to say, I want you to go get a file. When I do, it does a couple things. One is it goes ahead and creates these other render nodes, right? And if we looked over here, they would be here, right? Let's talk about that. Okay. The bump right here tells you that the bump value is 1 and the bump depth is 1. You can turn the bump depth up and down. It's at 100%. If it goes below 0, it's reversed and it's negative, but we don't have to worry about that right now. And if I go to File, Image Name, okay, when I click on this folder, guess where it's going to go? If I did it right, it goes to my source images, right? Maya projects, YouTube practice, source images. And here's the different ones that I made. And here's the bump example one that I just made for, see if that works. Yeah, there we go. For that we just made in Photoshop. Now, when I did that, no, I didn't change anything. This is still a solid face, but oh, what's going on here? This looks like there's some more modeling happening. Okay, there's not. It's a bump map and it's tricking the light. Okay, so if we render this, you're like, oh, look at that. This looks like it's dented in. This looks like it's bumped out. Okay, remember these were black at the top, dented in, 0% soft, 0% hardness, 100% hardness, 50%. And this was white. This is bumped out. 0% hardness, 100% hardness, 50% hardness. So this is why I didn't lock camera, because we can move up to this and sort of see, depending on where we are. See how the light moves? Okay, so depending on what angle we're looking at it, so this is dented in, this is bumped out. But if we move and we're looking at it in a different place, the lighting changes, right? It's super cool. Like we're just totally lied to the normal and said, pretend that this part is actually dented. Now we could have cut a bunch of circles and modeled and pushed this and pulled this and stuff, but that would take a long time, right? We don't want to do that. So that's an example of what the alpha channel that works as a bump map looks like. Now let's do a practical example. So I'm going to go back to this guy, and instead of this ugly thing I just made right there, I went and found some other images. And let's say we want to make a pebbly tile texture, okay, a pebble texture. So I found one of those, okay. And whoa, that looks kind of crazy, but it's all kinds of black and white gradient, right? And if we were to render this, we have very complex surface texture, right? That behaves and moves with the light on this perfectly smooth faced piece of geometry, okay? Because it took these pebbly looking objects and in a value scale, right, made them from white to black. So some bump in, some bump out. Let's look at a couple other ones. Just let's say it was a spaceship wall. So if I made a machine wall, let's go to machine wall. Okay, so I just found an image. Actually, I made an image, but we'll talk about that another day. I made an image that simply just had a whole bunch of, some, we call them dents and vents and cables, bits and things like that. Now, most of these look like they're dented in, which I think is backwards for what I want, right? Which I'm sure they are, but I'm sure because it was probably a black and white image. So what I could do is in my bump map options, I could switch that to -0. I could switch that to -0 and it would bump out instead of bump in. So this drawing, if the lines were black in the drawing, they're all going to dent in. If I wanted to reverse it, of course, I could reverse it in Photoshop, or in my bump material here, I could switch the bump map, right? And have the bump map be go into the negative, so it would bump the other direction. So this is still just that one single panel, but look how complicated it is. And it's not that it's a sticker, because if I move this around, or if I move the light, well, let's do that. Let's move the light. Let me grab my key light. Be a little better example. If I grab my key light and I move it, so for a second, so I can grab my key light here. All right, let's render this. Boop. Okay, so if we were to move our light, look at the light, how it's reflecting on this wall, how it's behaving with this wall, and it's changing depending on where this image is, right? It's much brighter. Okay, if we were to rotate it the other way, let's do that. Let's rotate it this way. So the light shine in this direction, right? It will cause different lighting reflections. Now remember, that's still just a flat panel. This is faking it with the normal and make it think it has all these ridges and bumps, okay, which is super cool. We don't have to model all that. We can fake it with the bump. Okay, so that saves us a ton of time. Now, if our hero in this video that we're making was going to run by this and stop at the wall and touch something, we might need to be a little bit more particular about what this looks like. But look at this. This has some great surface, like really up close. This has great textured material, right? But he's not perfect. So this is not for hero items where you're going to run in and turn some knobs. But if we're just running down the hallway and we're running past this complicated wall, they're probably not enough to model all of this. So that would be a good use of a bump map. So the takeaway is a bump map is black and white, right? The gray is 50% gray, neither bumps up in or out. The softer the transition between them, the smoother the bump will be. Like literally the smoother from flat to bumped out. This is very CG looking because it's not bumped and then literally in one pixel it's bumped out. Same thing with bumped in. Now, if you want to draw this yourself, you can choose any level of, gray or light or whatever you want. You could write your name. You could do anything you want to. And this black and white image, when applied as a bump map, will trick the normal into taking on the appearance of this. Okay, so you can make your own, you can find your own, or you don't like it, but you could also go into any, decent AI and ask it to make a bump map texture. The thing about that would be great, and I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, is you're not taking anyone else's artwork. So short of taking my own several hours to draw it myself, I could come up with some ideas, whatever. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you can find an image, you can draw an image, you could capture an image, turn it into black and white, and use it as a bump map. All right? All right. I hope that was clear as mud. And we'll do some more complex stuff because some of this also requires us to look at some UVs so that our objects are not all stretched out and funny looking. But that's for another video. But this is a great way to add texture without adding complexity to our geometry. Okay, I will see you guys next time. See you later. Bye-bye.